Okay, so you bought a mum, but how do you take care of it? Let's talk about it. First, let's talk about watering. If you're planning on leaving it in the pot that it came with, you're gonna have to water this thing every day. Unless, of course, it's raining or the weather turns really cool, but you've got a relatively large plant in a small pot with good drain holes, so it's not going to be overwatered. In fact, it's going to suck the moisture out of this little pot rather quickly on warm days. Now, if you don't have time to be watering this thing every day, then put it into a larger pot or pot it in the ground, and then it's going to hold more moisture for longer. Now, two things to consider: while your mum is actively blooming, it doesn't really need fertilizer at this point. Before it blooms, yes. After it blooms, probably not until the following spring. And then also, while it is actively blooming, you don't need to give it as much sunlight. So you could actually put this up on your porch where it's not getting direct sun. It's still going to finish its bloom cycle, even if it's not in direct sun. Now, if you purchase a mum that is not in bloom yet, this one is covered in buds, but they're not opening yet, you will need to give this one at least 4 or 5 hours of sunlight to encourage it to bloom more quickly. And of course, if you decide to put this out in your landscape to grow for the following year, it will need at least a half day of sun to bloom properly. Now, I mentioned the next year because depending on where you live and what type of mum you buy, there's a really good chance that your mum is a perennial. So all the mums that we grow here in Texas are going to be perennials for our area. So when they are done blooming, you can actually take them, plant them in your flower bed in that area that gets at least a half day of sun, and then allow them to grow for the following year. Ideally, you will plant them in the ground before your first frost, and then once the top of your mum freezes back and turns brown, you're gonna cut it to within a couple inches of the ground, and then put a little bit of mulch over the top of the roots, and that's gonna help insulate it in the wintertime. And the last thing I'll mention is that as your blooms begin to be spent and turn brown, you can deadhead mums, and that will keep them looking better for longer. So in that case, you would just go through and find any brown blooms and pinch them off, and that will give room for the last of the flower buds to then come up and bloom.